Welcome to Rodney Veal's Inspired By, a production of Public Media Connect, the regional partnership of CET in Cincinnati and Think TV in Dayton. Rodney Veal, our host for this podcast, is an independent choreographer, interdisciplinary artist, and all-around fan of all things arts and creativity, and he's excited to share another great conversation with you. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoy the show, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
We're very excited today to have a conversation with Keigo Hirakawa, a jazz musician, musician extraordinaire. But he has so many different facets to him, and it's just a fascinating story. So I just felt like we got to have him on our podcast. So Keigo, welcome to Rodney Veal's Inspired By.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to you.
Oh, this is going to be super cool. Now, a full caveat to the audience. I mean, we've known each other for a while. We've intersected and connected and for years. And so
unavoidable. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's unavoidable when you're making like some great music and you're connected to folks who even in your own family. We'll get to that too. But it's one of those interesting things. It's like to explain to people what I love about you is the fact that you are a full-time professor at UD?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, you've got to tell people what you do at UD, because that just to kind of set this up.
Okay, so I'm a professor at the University of Dayton, and I'm in the electrical and computer engineering department. So, and I'm technically the undergraduate program coordinator here too.
So he does this, people, so that we understand this, and Keigo does this, but then he has this alter ego. He's like this jazz like superhero. Like I've been listening to your music and I'm like, oh man, how are you? So this whole notion of like the fact that you're working in computer and electrical engineering and you're advising, but then you also have a family and plus you're doing this incredible jazz music. So how did you get to this place where you were combining these two things as a life?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't even make sense to me at times. But somehow, I'm here doing what I do, and I think the music has always been a big part of me, and it's actually the first thing I wanted to do. Like I decided when I was in kindergarten that I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a conductor, but then somehow it kind of morphed into, well, I like science, and maybe I'll do some scientific or technical stuff at some point. And so when I went to college, I majored in electrical and computer engineering. And the reason was that, by that time, I've started liking jazz, but I was a late bloomer as far as, what a typical jazz musician goes through. Like people have been doing this for years before you've arrived at college and so on and so forth. So, even though I really started liking this stuff, I knew that I wasn't good enough to be like, pursuing this as a full-time career. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do this and do engineering, but I'm going to keep working at it because I really am passionate about music. And I met some really, wonderful people that helped me out along the way. And, sooner or later, I was spending more time playing music than doing studying. So, but there's a lot of catching up to do, and I was passionate about it. And it was fortunate that I was at a university that was close enough to New York City that I could go see the shows, I could go hang out or take lessons with some of the musicians that I really grew up listening to. And so it was very fortunate in that circumstance. But it also meant that I wasn't really choosing one passion over another. I really liked engineering, but I also very much liked music. But being a late bloomer by end of college, I'm still not there. I know what I want to become as a musician. It still wasn't, I still haven't caught up enough to be, good enough to play with the people I want to play with and whatnot. So I thought, I guess I should. This is my calling. This means that I should keep going on in engineering and not music. So I ended up pursuing engineering, trying to get a doctorate degree. So I started my master's program and I started my PhD after that. But during that time, I kept practicing. I kept working as a musician, working as much as I could. And eventually, it got to a point where I just couldn't let go. So I ended up not finishing my PhD. I left. And I left in a sort of a a manner that left the door open. So I told my PhD advisor, yeah,
So
because
you left room. You left room for the door,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If any of my students are listening, they probably should, cover their ears. But I told my PhD, yeah, I mean, so I guess it was very unconventional, but I told my PhD advisor that I needed to leave to pursue this, music degree. I got into New England Conservatory's master's program because I couldn't help but start applying to these places. So I told my advisor, I'm going to come back in 2 years. Don't worry. And he was like, he was understanding, or trying to be understanding. And then so I left. But as I was leaving, so literally, within a week of me leaving this university, I had this, amazing productivity in the engineering stuff that I was doing. So I ended up, like getting a lot of really good results, the things that I was really trying to do as an engineer, as a sort of a doctorate candidate. And then so, as literally the day before I left, I went to talk to my PhD advisor and said, hey, this is what I got done, and I think this is a great idea. And he's telling me that, hey, this is really, really good. You should keep going with this. And I'm going to say that this is your ticket out of Cornell. So if you wanted to graduate, do what you just showed me, and complete that work. So, I told my advisor, goodbye, and I left for Boston. But, I kept writing, I kept pursuing that on the side, and I kept writing my dissertation based on that work. And so when I was at the music school, which is a 2-year program, during my first year, I finished all my experiments, and I wrote all my dissertation material, and I flew back, and then I defended my PhD, even though I was technically not a student that's in absentia taking a break, but I was supposed to be taking a break, but I still finished it. And then during the second year, I started working with a professor at Harvard. So I started I started collaborating with a professor there while I was still a second year master's student. So my intention was to take a break from engineering. I never left engineering. My intention was to do, like put aside music for engineering, and I never managed to do that. So somehow, like it just, yeah, it just never forced me to choose, or I forced myself not to choose, I guess. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
and so my resume doesn't make any sense, because you would see that my, two of my schoolings overlap and they do, it's like going to two schools at the same time. So
Oh, that is insane. I remember we talked about that because it was like that overlap, and I was like,
mhm.
and I love the fact that you said unconventional. I mean, so
Yeah,
you said, okay, so hopefully your students will cover their ears,
yeah.
but is it, but would you say that unconventional pursuit of both at the same time enhanced each other in a way?
It it's a matter of, like I don't know if it enhances each other, because both disciplines take a lot of time. Like I know, Rodney, that you've done, you've tried to perfect your art in dance and art, the visual arts, and it takes time. Like it takes all your brain power to do that. And what I do in engineering is almost like that too, because it's a research with no clear answers, and so but you're supposed to come up with that answer, and so you spend your time, while you're brushing your teeth thinking about it. So both of those disciplines aren't the type of things where you work 8 to 5 and you set it aside. It doesn't work like that. It's just something that you just have to completely be immersed in. So to have those two things that are both take a lot of time, but yet I still want to do them, that is often created a lot of challenge. um
Okay.
I,
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I mean, I can see the challenge. I
yeah.
can imagine. I mean, because it's that whole notion of, you're absolutely right about, it takes all your brain energy just to
Mhm.
dance. I don't think people understand. I'm mentally exhausted, and I'm going through the, and the weird part is I'm it's it's really weird for me because I've stepped back into performing. So
Mhm.
yesterday I had a rehearsal. It took all my power
Yeah.
to drive the car back home. I danced for only 30 minutes, and I was like, okay, this is a lot. This is a
Yeah,
lot. I need to I need to take a nap. And so so I
exactly,
totally get
exactly.
that. So I mean, but that's I mean, going back, it's like, because you were at Cornell for
Mm-hmm.
your master's degree in engineering, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you were really were close to New York. So I I'm kind of curious because this goes back to what you started with. You said you wanted to be a conductor when you were a kid. Were you thinking about
Yeah.
being a conductor of classical music?
Yes. Yeah. That's what I wanted to
Oh,
do.
oh, you were like all in. I mean,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah. So was that? Well, how was that met? I mean, from a perspective of like your family and friends, like when you said, "I'm going to be a conductor of a
I mean,
symphony."
I think obviously every parent has concerns for what their kids you know pursue in their career, but I had a very supportive family that you know saw what I was interested in. But at the same time, I was both interested in science and music at the same time throughout my childhood too. So even though I gravitated towards music very, very early on, they also saw that this science and math and engineering thing was also going to probably take a role in my life as well. I don't think they knew what I was going to come out to be like. I don't think I knew. I was just doing what I wanted to do rather than thinking like this is my plan. I just had to do it. I think if you ask any artist, right, why they would pursue that, it's usually not because of it usually doesn't make sense in terms of the finances and whatnot, right? You do it because and it doesn't make sense in terms of how much hours you put in just to get that little bit more improvement. Like you can meet the basic minimum requirement in a different way, but you still put in that many more hours above and beyond that. So I think every artist go into it thinking like, I just have to do it. I can't live without thinking about doing this as part of my life, making that part of my life. And I say the same thing about people who pursue dual careers. People don't have to pursue, dual careers, and it's oftentimes doesn't make any sense to do that, but you do it because you just can't help it. So and that's where I am. Like I can't help trying to do music, and I can't help trying to do this other thing that I'm really passionate about. So it's like it makes no sense to do music as a career in terms of finances or whatnot, but I still doing it, and it makes no sense to do it two careers at the same time, but I just have to.
It's just I love that. I love it because and talking to you, Higo, is like every artist I've talked to on the podcast, they've all said the same thing, and
Yeah.
we feel like I just have to. There was
Yeah.
no there was no negotiation about
Right.
how,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And so it's really interesting to me because I feel like that through line, but each person is so different. Each story is so different, and I
Hmm.
love the
Hmm.
fact that your story is rooted in these two different worlds, and so but you still maintain a foot in both. I mean, and I know from a professor's
Hmm.
standpoint because I'm still teaching.
Hmm.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is.
It's a lot in comparison on top of what you do as as a musician and an artist. So I mean, is one eventually going to, I mean, not to jinx it or anything, do you think one will overtake the other? I mean, just throwing it out there out of
Yeah,
curiosity.
like I can see myself. Well, let's put it this way: if there was a regret in what I do, right? That there are compromises because of the career choices that you have to make. If I had my choice in being where I wanted to, a lot of jazz musicians, at least for some period of their time, will have considered, living in New York and giving that a try. It doesn't necessarily end up that way for everybody, but like it's just it's at least something that question is always posed to people, and then they make a conscious decision as to whether they think that's a part of their career plan or not. With it being that New York is one of these places that where you can test your waters and test your footing and see what happens, and you get because there's a large concentration of people that are trying to do the same thing. You meet a lot of interesting people. Maybe you meet the sort of the bandmates that you want to play with, even if it's for a temporary period of time that you shared in one place together. And I really wanted to do it, but just because I wanted to do it doesn't mean that I could, because if I wanted to be a professor, like you got to for every job application that's out there, there's like over 100 people that apply, right? So I like it's not like I can just simply walk into a university and say, would you consider me? It doesn't work that way. So there are compromises I made in one side of the career to make room for the other, right? But in saying that, like I've enjoyed being here, but as a musician myself, I have to make sure that my progress isn't sacrificed because I made certain life choices. So whenever I, put bigger milestones like putting an album together or putting big projects together, I have a full intention of presenting myself as somebody who is trying to uphold my standards to to say if I pursued music 100%, I would like to be at this level by this time, or at some point in my career, and I'm trying to meet those goals, and I'm putting my like a metric against those milestones that whether I can hit those and whether I can be satisfied with that, right? So whether I pursue it as a full time or not, like I don't want to lower my standards. I guess that's an easier way to say it, right?
Yeah, right. No, I totally get that. I mean, it's a notion of even even though that they're like they're I knew the pinnacle of, like, as a performer, as a dancer, what my pinnacle was. I knew what my personal ceiling was. I felt like I attained it, but it still doesn't stop me from trying to go, what does that ceiling look like as I'm older? What is I mean, does the ceiling change as you get older and as you've had life experience? I mean, is it fixed? I mean, I guess that would be my question out of curiosity.
I think that's a question that every artist has to investigate, right, and explore. I feel like I haven't found that ceiling yet, or rather that I figured out, because there's just so many different ways to pursue this art. I'm trying to always say to myself that I don't have to be everything that every other artist do, but I have to figure out what my strengths are and how much I can exploit that. And I feel like I haven't exhausted that yet. So I don't know whether you call that a ceiling or not, but I feel like is part of my music playing that I can still leverage on to take me to the next step. So I haven't exhausted my options yet there. So that keeps me going. Maybe I will hit that ceiling at one point, but I haven't bumped it yet. But I am also flying blind. Right?
I love that. Right, because you didn't plan for this. And so,
yeah.
I mean, what leads me to this question about, I mean, do you think you could have pursued a classical music realm?
No, heck no. No, that's
okay. So it really was jazz.
Yeah.
I mean, what attracted you to jazz? I mean, there are a lot of people, and I'm not saying I love jazz. I mean, I love what you do, and I mean, I'm grooving. I'm like, but there's some people who have a hard time getting into jazz, and so I'm like, what spoke to you about jazz as a vehicle for creativity?
So, there's a terminology that people in the jazz world use, and that's called being bitten by the bug, and that's the moment where things click for you and we're like, oh, this is something that I want to pursue. And it is really like that, where there's like a switch that turns on. For me, that happened during high school, and I was at late high school, between junior and senior year. I was playing saxophone at the time. My piano was my main instrument, but I was playing saxophone at the time, mostly for fun. And then I guess if you play saxophone, like the natural thing to do is to go, play high school jazz band and, whatnot. And they were okay. They were fun for me, but they weren't like grabbing my attention to the point that I wanted to pursue the career. But I, just as for this funness, I ended up eventually at a jazz camp one summer, and everybody else was just amazing. And, because they've really studied this stuff. And I guess I've never just been around people that have really, been trying to do this for real. And when I met these people and they were improvising, very fluidly through tunes that I've never heard before, but they were obvious things, these were sort of like the things that everybody should have known by the time they got to these music camps, but I didn't. I was just kind of like, faking my way through. But I saw what these people could do. And I was just like, it was just amazing. And some people were hipping me to Miles Davis at that. And, until then I had heard of him, not have, spent that much time. So this is what I mean. Like I was really a late bloomer by the by the time I came back from this jazz camp, between junior and senior year in my high school, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And from then, every little job that I did, I kept counting my paychecks based, by how many CDs I can buy, the lawn that I mowed, was translated to 3 CDs that I could buy, whatever.
Right. I know that feeling. So you just almost in a way, it sounds like you just kind of self-taught yourself after you got that initial bug. Like you just kind of went,
Yeah.
well,
It's just immersion, that's where like the immersion started, right? And you just can't get rid of it yet, have enough of it.
You can't get enough of it. You just shake it. So did you find yourself just going down rabbit holes of different jazz artists that just kind of took you places? Was there one in particular, other than Miles, was that initial like aha bug, but is there one that just really stands out to you? Like you're just like, you know what, this is the guy, this is the person. Something about them.
Early on, I never really listened to that many piano players, even after I started getting into it. I was really actually fascinated by, a lot of horn players, so saxophones and trumpets, for example. And so I was listening to a lot of these musicians that some bands would not have any pianists, and that was fine with me. Those are some of my favorite kinds of platforms. So the people that I really gravitated towards were like, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Branford Marsalis was another one that I really obsessed over. Michael Brecker. These are all saxophonists and trumpeters and all these people. And that's what I listened to a lot. Along the way, but I was also helped by the fact that I had amazing teachers that I consider myself really, really lucky, because I got to really study with people that I really don't deserve to have studied at the stage that I was at necessarily, but they helped me along the way, and that also their expectations were also very high too, out of a kid that's just barely holding it together. So
well, they had to see so they had to. Well, in essence, they had to hear something. They had to feel something, and they had to feel something. You made them feel something, because that's. I mean, I know what that. I never underestimate an instructor who goes, "I see something.
I might have made up for it by passion. I don't know.
I faked it till I made it as a
ballet. Yeah, right.
I mean, there are things that I was like, I totally, I could sympathize with that one. That's a very empathetic thing. So we're going to take a quick break, but then we're going to come back, and I'm going to start talking to you about making jazz albums, because I have a question about that. So Everybody just stay tuned.
I'm Christine Ray, Senior Membership Coordinator of Public Media Connect. Thank you for listening to Rodney Veal's Inspired By. This podcast is a production of CET and Think TV, 2 local PBS stations. As PBS stations, the work we do online, on air, and in the community is supported by listeners like you. If you're enjoying the show and would like to support our work, please consider becoming a member of cetconnect.org or thinktv.org. Plus, when you sign up to donate at least $5 a month, you'll get access to special members-only streaming videos on the PBS app through Passport. Learn more at cetconnect.org or thinktv.org. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
All right, so Keigo, this is my question as we come back from the break. Is you mentioned about making albums, and so one of the things I wanted to ask you, because there's something very as someone who takes in music a lot, like from all different genres, is it because I feel like popular music, because of studio production, how much of that is like kind of pushed to the side in order to keep an authentic sound to make a jazz album? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, there's a special sound on a quality jazz album that you can't, and if you over enhance it, it's not going to sound right when it's performed live. So is that a conscious decision, like to minimize production?
I think you have to go in it understanding what that those choices that you have on the tables are, and then you have to make a conscious decision as to where you want to calibrate yourself to, the fully acoustic and fully spontaneousness on one end, right, and then fully orchestrated and pre-planned and follow the roadmap and whatnot on the other hand. And I think it's everybody's right to choose where you are in that spectrum. But people are very, very aware of it. And obviously, you could go the very, scripted route, or, this is the exact, map that you follow, and the sort of the you exploit everything that, all the new gear and whatnot that allows you to edit everything in and punch everything in. Or you can go like, let's see what happens. And there's many different ways of thinking about that. And like you'll see some of the greatest artists, that would, say, I there's this one take that I just want to redo again. Whatever, you'll see, that there's nothing wrong with doing that. However, it is a very, magical thing that happens in jazz when, people are reacting to each other, right? It's not, even though it's presented to people as if, you have one soloist and another soloist and another soloist, and you take our turns and whatnot. But it really, the best musicians, are always, bringing their A game at every point in their music, where, if somebody else is soloing, you're trying to make them sound better, and you're constantly reacting. And, those reactions might cause the soloist to change, to be inspired at the moment and try something different, right? So there is a lot of unknown there, and how much you want to exploit that is the sort of the measure of risk that you might choose to take in that studio, right? And then as you do that, if you choose to be really, let your spontaneity take over, then there's no guarantee that, that one take that you take is going to be good enough. You might have to redo it, and that, so there's always a risk that you might end up, with multiple takes that more than, you would have liked. Maybe you run out of money for, before the studio session's over, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a consideration too. I mean,
yeah, that is.
I never really thought about that. I mean,
yeah,
you're paying for time.
Yeah. So, you could play it safe. You could play it, but then, like, you could also let the magic drive it and see what happens. So for me, so what I want to do is to be spontaneous. So, I take those risks and happily, and then say, I want to see what happens. Even if I end up with a lot fewer tracks than I had originally hoped to get, I'm happy with, a few tracks that ended up really, saying that where everybody, just let it go and said, I want to see what is possible, right? So that's the route that I choose, but then it doesn't have to be.
So it's one of the things I was always curious about that, because it was like, I always felt like because I listen to, quite a bit of pop music because of, because I teach jazz.
Yeah.
So therefore I have to kind of listen, and I'm very sensitive to that production of sound. And so when I'm introducing something like a classical work, or like a ballet work, or classical work, or I'm working in different genres, jazz, there's just a different organic sound. And I just feel like it's less about the moving the knobs and more about what you just described, that spontaneity. And so is it important for you to, because you've worked with the same group of musicians pretty much. I mean, I've noticed like you've worked with Eddie Brookshire, and is that important that the relationships between jazz musicians is less of it's more than just, hey, let's pick up instruments and play. That's important to that spontaneity, right?
It can work both ways. Like if you work with some of the musicians that for a long time, then that you can get a certain performance out of that musician if you led yourself in a certain direction. So for many of my bands, I might write compositions specifically tailored to those musicians, because I know that that's the best that they can, like that's when they would bring out their best, right? Because they like that sound, or because they're, that's the strength that those musicians offer. So a lot of times that it works like that. So, you just mentioned Eddie Brookshire and Fenton Sparks, which are the two rhythm sections I started out with in Dayton. They had this certain sound that combination really worked. And so like I would write compositions, like with that in mind. But then I would work with some of the other musicians, and I have, some of that comes back as my inspiration, and I would write compositions where I know that those musicians will sound good. but then you do that, and then you also work with some other musicians and bring that music that you have composed for another situation, and then they will surprise you because they also have a very different interpretation also, right, of that music, and that's when the music takes on a second life. So
okay, so I was thinking about that because it's like in this sort of like, because you talked about composing, and
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, so you really in essence it's in making your album, and you talked
Mhm.
and because this is not the first album you've made, because you've made.
I've been on 7, but 3 as a leader or co-leader, and
Okay.
the most recent one that I recorded will be coming out in June.
We're coming in June.
Mhm.
So wow, so it's like, how, I mean, that's what's blowing my mind is like, so the composition, because we talked about it, because I still have a piece of art for you, by the way.
Yeah.
I still have a piece of art for you, by the way.
I know.
It's hanging on my door. It's hanging on my door in my dining room. It's like literally up there.
Yeah.
Right.
That's my 8th one. That's gonna be my 8th album.
Anything else? So for
Yeah.
full caveat, Keigo asked me to create a piece of art that would be the inspiration for the album cover. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
That was new for me.
I'm excited about that collaboration.
Yeah, see, and that's what I love about this conversation, because and having this conversation, because about making music, because I never really knew how much goes into. I know how much goes into just producing a dance,
Mhm.
which is ephemeral. So like, you produce a dance and then people see it, and then unless you video or tape it, it's never to be seen again.
Mhm.
But you have a recording that will probably last past all of us. Well, actually, it will
Yeah.
last past
Yeah,
all of us.
right.
Is that a consideration when you're making an album? I mean, or are you just worried about just making the album? It's like, I got this idea, but you're not thinking about posterity. You're not looking.
I'm not thinking about posterity, but I am thinking about how I'm presenting myself, and like I think that, and it's really a metric that I'm putting for myself rather than for other people to judge me. I mean, like music is such that some people love what you do, and some people will be like, oh, this is not for me. And I take no offense in that. I mean, I think it's true of any art, right? Because you're really trying to pursue something, and it's not like you're trying to just appeal to the masses. Some styles of artistry is that way too, but you wouldn't go into jazz thinking that way.
Well, you're definitely not ballet thinking that way either.
Yeah. So with that said, I want to appeal to people for people that appreciate it. I want to appeal to the fact that I that there is something special there. But the metric that I put on myself, like I kind of mentioned before, is like, I want to make sure that these big milestones, like a recording or big projects, reflect where I should have been and would have been if I pursued music 100% of the time. So, that's the metric that I put to make sure that when people hear my work, it doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like a pianist that does this on the side. It has to sound like somebody who is, like, oh yeah, like you wouldn't have known that I do engineering as for a living. That's important to me.
Oh, that's wild. That is so wild, because I would never have thought. I mean, I would never have thought to process it that way. I mean, what I'm saying, like, I'm like, huh. It's giving me, like, and I'm thinking about it. I'm like, well, how would I? I mean, because because you and I have talked, and I mean, I have a political science degree, and I to this day I just go,
yeah,
why did I pursue that? But then I realize that it's because I'm doing these things in the community that require negotiations and diplomacy and things like that. I'm like, oh, that did pay off. Now I see. I mean, but do you think that the structure of engineering allows you to kind of like be able to just? Do you say, like, there's some, like, I'm very amorphous, but you're very like, but it's not. I want to say straight and narrow, because your music expands and explodes out. So you're creative in that regard. I'm impressed. I'm like, how does he do that? I'm like, how does he do that? So, I mean, what do you think you attribute it to, other than the drive? I mean, there's got to be something to it.
Drive. I mean, I think, like I'm going to answer this in a slightly different angle, that engineering, at least certain aspects of engineering, can be very, very, very creative. Like, you still have to follow the rules that's given to you, because if you're designing bridges, you don't want it to fall or whatever. But like within the constraint of what you're given, there is so many degrees of freedom. And so some people are, create solutions that's very different than somebody else who's trying to solve the same problem, but just those approaches to the solutions are very different. And like there are times when I look at other people's, what other people have done, and I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I didn't think about that, but that works. So there's a lot of room for creativity there, and there's a lot of room for creativity, obviously, in music or other people who make that a profession. But the engineering side is definitely very creative, and I feel like that side of engineering and the creative side of engineering, the creative side of music, not the technical side, but the creative side, they inform each other quite a bit. So I find myself, when I have a very creative spurts in engineering, that's also when I'm like, I have so many, like new ideas in music that's flowing through my head, and vice versa. So, and there are times when both sides are, equally, neglected and like, down on the bottom of the pit.
Do you like have a fight to like go, okay, wait a minute, no, wait, I should write this down, but no, I should play. I mean, do you actually do that?
I mean, it's more like, okay, I could, like, I know I have a big, meeting in the morning at work, but I still have this idea in my head. So I'm just going to stay up till 3 a.m., finish this composition or whatever, Yeah, it's yeah, you just can't say, one is more important than the other. So.
Okay, so this is going to freak people out as well. You are a family man, too. So on top of this, being a dad to 3 kids.
Yeah.
Come on, dude, 3 in the morning. Like, wow. How? And I just...
I have a very understanding family.
And also a very talented family, I might add. I mean, mm-hmm. for folks to know, like, your wife is as accomplished as you are, and your kids are. I stalk the family on Instagram.
Yeah. No, but they're amazing.
They're amazing. They're playing instruments and doing all these cool things. I'm thinking, oh my god, that's the coolest household on the planet. Like, how cool is this? So, did you ever was that important for you and Wemby that your kids pursued music as well? Because music is a real big part of both of your lives.
Yeah, right. It is. Yeah. So my wife is a violinist, and she teaches violin. And she teaches one of my younger kids violin as well, which I think that's amazing on its own, because usually parents can't be a music teacher for their kids. But it's to us, it doesn't necessarily, obviously it would make us happy if they were also enjoyed music, but it didn't necessarily have to be that they ended up being as passionate about music as we are. But we did think, like, I guess maybe just being an Asian parent, right, that like, I think music and it can foster some values in, like, work ethic. If you work and spend a lot of time doing something that can show the fruits of that effort in some rewarding way. So, like, there are ways that the music can be become part of your self, like help improve yourself. And I think we gravitated to that aspect of music. Now, it turned out that the kids liked music, and so that's an added benefit, but it wasn't necessarily like an expectation that we had.
It was like
it does make us proud. Yeah, I mean,
it's like we scored.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only imagine, because I grew up in a household where I was the only artistic, creative one, mm-hmm. and there's still to this day they just go, "We don't know what you do, but you seem to be thriving." That was the statement.
Yeah. But I did lose out on the idea that like I thought maybe if I had played jazz music throughout in the house all the time, that they'll pick up wanting to do some jazz early on. Nah, it didn't work out that way.
Do they just really just like, oh no, Dad?
Yeah. So I mean, my wife, my wife definitely won out on that battle. I think they definitely gravitate towards classical music, and that's great. I love it too.
That's totally funny. That is so funny. I can totally imagine. Oh my god, that's really super cool. So, All right, so we're gonna come back to the album because your seventh album because we talked about it. Your eighth album, hopefully art.
Yeah. Our collaboration.
I'm super excited.
Yeah.
We're working on that one, folks. Art collaboration. But the seventh album, I mean, 7. So what's this like thematically to describe the album to the audience? So they kind of, and yes, you can pick up the album wherever you buy music. So
yeah.
I'm just full caveat there.
Yeah, thanks for the plug.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, of course. I mean, but just thematically, because that's one of the things I'm always impressed by jazz albums. They can have those big sweeping themes. So, like,
yeah,
what's the inspiration for this one? 7.
So this album that's coming out in June is a little bit of a different take that I decided to pursue. So usually I work with my trio in a trio format, which yielded our previous album, and that's been a steady band, but this newest album are a set of musicians that I put together for this album in a format that we haven't really tried yet. So collaborating in that is a guitarist, Brandon Scott Coleman, who's a guitarist based out of Cincinnati. And he and I have played in different bands together, and I've been in his band for some periods as well. And like his music is very inspiring to me, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote some compositions that were inspired by Brandon, and that's one of the reasons why I had him join me for this album. And then there's a saxophonist in Detroit named Raphael Staton, who is just like one of my favorite saxophonists around. And when I first played with him, it's like, oh, I just want to keep doing this. And he introduced me to the other 2 musicians, Alex White, who's on the drums. He's a phenomenal drummer. And then also Raphael works with one of the big the jazz greats, Robert Hurst, who I grew up listening to because he was playing in Wynton Marsalis's band and Branford Marsalis's band. He's been on 7 different Grammy albums, like all these things. But regardless, like he was one of my bassists that I grew up listening to, and happens to be somebody that Raphael plays with a lot. So like I put this band together, and the theme or the idea was I wanted to have very distinct musicians, the musicians who have whose performance styles you can just identify immediately. If you knew who Brandon was, you can pick that out because he has a very different approach to guitar. If you heard Bob Hurst, like that was an unmistakable way that he approaches this sense of swing, or so these are really distinct personalities that I put together, and I wanted to see what happens. So I took some of the music that I typically play in this trio format, and I threw it in a completely different way, and then I put the interesting musicians in the same room and thought, what could happen? And a lot happened. It like this sort of this musical experiment that I put together really yielded amazing results. It's hard to say amazing to talk about myself, because it's actually not me that made this album. It's like like I brought in the composition, and then there's always a way that I've been playing it, but I threw it to these musicians, and they they started owning it as much as I did. It's not like they just performed it and then just press record, but they were like, oh, it would sound better if we did it that way, or why don't we, I see a potential if we did, if we went into Latin groove here or whatever. So they threw out their ideas, and by the end of this recording session, it was like a joint effort and collaboration and whatnot, that came out of all 5 of us. And I'm so grateful that I brought these 5 people that really wanted to play this stuff, because they just love doing what they do, right? So their individuality showed. I think that I can't take credit for these compositions anymore, in the sense that they won't have sounded the same with playing with any other musicians, and so a lot of experimentation with music resulted in this music that I'm really proud to present. So
wow, that's sounds like a real departure, this experimentation.
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of cool. I mean do you think the experimentation came out of, would you experiment? I guess I'll put it this way: would you have experimented this way earlier in your career?
No. Mm-mm. Yeah. So and that's the milestone that I feel like I could say that I did hit, that I, like, there is a sense of, openness and trust that I have to have with other musicians, and and also the caliber of musicians also, I made me, make sure that I put on the A game, both in terms of performance, in terms of composition, in terms of just, managing this whole process. Yeah, it's a thing of its own, but it's definitely a milestone that where I could say I definitely wouldn't have been able to do this way before. I also, like, I think, it's because I've kept working towards this craft that I got to meet the people that I wanted to play with. So I could say that it was, a matter of a couple of days in the studio, or I could say there was a process that was long, like, developed over long periods where it led me to this, this recording. So.
Oh, wow, that's so cool. So because you talked about the 8th album that's coming out after this.
Yeah.
Which I'm excited. Do you think that the experimental album is going to influence the 8th, or is it just? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes when you do an experiment, all of a sudden it's like, I never thought about it this way.
It definitely puts everything in context, but at the same time, like, when you have different musicians, then the experiment happens at that moment. When you have those musicians there, right? So the composition of musicians definitely make a difference, and also, that the 8th album, is actually recorded before the 7th album in a way. So it's kind of going back in time, but it kind of puts that different take. And there are like two compositions that is played in the new album that's coming out in June, and the 8th one that's yet to be released. So like, it'll be interesting to see that contrast too.
Oh, wow. Okay, so there's some things to kind of connect to. So, what would you tell to someone who's considering this career pathway with music? What do you say to their parents? Because this is
my
really
God.
important. Yeah. I mean, because it's, like you said, it's like, what would you say to them? I mean, it's like, what would be your advice? One nugget of advice that you kind of gleaned from your experience over time.
Wow, that's a difficult question.
Oh my God, I asked a difficult question.
Yeah. That's yours. Yeah, you've done your job. I mean, it is definitely not something to be taken lightly, right? But at the same time, people have got to, you got to look back on your life and, say that you tried something, or that you don't regret doing something. And if that regret might be that you didn't give it something a try, I think, is that a conscious choice, or is that something that just happened upon you? So I do think that every person, regardless of what parents might say, will have to be owning the process of those career choices, for sure, right? I mean, and that's not just the parent issue, right? Like, it's also true with spouses and whatnot. When you have kids, you make different choices. Those are there. I had one student, I can tell you. So at University of Dayton, like, we don't just teach, but we also have, we're academic advisors to some of the students, and we guide them along in their program and make sure that they hit all the courses that they need to hit at the timing that they need to, and all that stuff. And we give some career advices if they have questions about what choices you can make in courses and stuff. But I had one student come in and tell me, I decided to stick around for another year. I'm like, oh, how come? And he says, well, I decided to do a minor in psychology, and it's your fault. And I'm like, oh, it's my fault. Okay, what is this about? And he's like, I know that how much like we talked about the music stuff and how I left engineering to do music and stuff. And he told me, I realized at that moment that I could do engineering and do this other thing that I'm passionate about before I graduate. You taught me that. So I decided that I'm going to stick around for one more year and then do this for myself. So, yeah, I mean, that felt good. Yeah, that felt really
great.
Good. Yeah. And so, I think, and that's a, if I can be that type of person that can at least appeal to one person and say that, hey, this is possible. I don't have to be everything for everybody, but like, there are people that probably look at what I have done, and then at least, that can help inform what their decisions might be. And in that student's case, like he was still in the driver's seat. I'm sure he had conversations with his parents and decided that this is still possible. And, so good for him. And those are the kind of, choices that people can make when they put in that. They have, all that stuff has to be married with, the amount of effort that they're willing to put in. They're not just doing it because you can, but you're doing it because you need to, and you want to. Then I think, these real conversations can happen, but at the same time, I could say, like both my wife and I are engineers and musicians, and, so we had our, like life experiences match in some ways, but, like I was a lot more crazy about practicing, like as many hours as I can squeeze in, and, I still do all the things I do. And so I as far as like this family context and the decisions that I make, I call my life a pre-existing condition. So by the time I met my wife, I was already this way. She, so she has to just accept that, that's who she married. So.
This guy with a pre-existing condition of being an awesome musician. That's not a bad pre-existing condition, I might add. Just let
it comes with its own baggage, yeah.
Okay, this has been fantastic because that's why I love having these conversations with you. I smile easily. We have these really great conversations, and I'm super excited that I keep walking past the piece of art that I for you.
Yes,
so,
yes.
So it's coming. It is there. So this has been fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm also glad to be talking to somebody who has thought hard about his own career. It's not like I can just talk to anybody and be like this. I have to explain these along the way of explaining my own life choices. It's more like, like we've both walked through these, tough choices through life.
Yeah. And still walking through them.
That's right.
Still walking through them. Yeah, and that's what it is. It's about the choices. And it is about the hard work. That's why we have such great conversations, because it's truly, to me, it's about the hard work. It's always about the work. Put in the work.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't come easy.
Yep. Cool. All right, Mike.
Rodney Veal's Inspired By is a production of Public Media Connect, the regional partnership of CET in Cincinnati and Think TV in Dayton. There's a lot of great art happening around Southwest Ohio, and we're excited to be part of it. If you like this episode, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can learn more and find the show notes at thinktv.org/inspired by or cetconnect.org/inspired by. Thank you.